Hello everyone, welcome back to Maverick Mods. My name is Mark. I'm on a quest to keep survivors on the road and just do hot rods. I'm working on a 71 Firebird, turning it from basically a plain Jane Firebird into a totally custom LS swapped resto mod badass hot rod, hopefully. What are we doing today? Well, this marks the, I guess I'd call it the next to last phase of the Firebird project. Started off with disassembly and cleanup, went to repairs, a lot of rust repair, panel replacement, etc. Went from there to modifications and fabrication. That was new suspension and all the goodies that I put on the car, plus getting the LS, the 6-speed, everything in there. Next phase, which I'm starting on, is assembly. So it's going to go from a bunch of disassociated parts and pieces, and I'll start, getting it all back together, cleaned up, painted, etc. Final phase will be paint and finish. We'll talk about that down the road a ways. It's been a little over a year. I kind of figured, maybe it's about time to make a change or two to the channel. So I got a new hat. Moving on. Today I'm going to be focusing on getting the front subframe, the engine cradle, and the body, the shell, re-sandblasted. And the reason I'm doing that is it's garnered a little bit of rust in the last year or so. Plus, I did so many modifications that I kind of need to blend everything back together. So the theory is I was going to try dustless blasting. I got an attachment for a pressure washer from Eastwood, worked out really well. Borrowed we're talking a serious pressure washer. The thing puts out something like 5,000 PSI, which is what you need. The typical one you can buy down at, your box store probably only puts out about 2,500, 3,000 PSI. It's not enough. This one, it put out some pressure. But I figured I'd give it a try and see if it's any better than what I've been doing, which is the normal dry sandblasting. So let's find out. Grab your popcorn, let's get started. Okay, did the dustless blasting. What are my opinions? Well, I went home yesterday really sore and slept like a dead man last night. And the soreness is not done. I spent the majority of today cleaning up a lot of wet sand, buckets and buckets and buckets of wet sand. What does all that mean? If the outcome is equivalent to dry blasting, then not a problem. However, every piece that I did the dustless blasting on is going to require some kind of cleanup, and in some cases a lot of cleanup. And that's after using, well, I bought a product from Eastwood which is supposed to prep the metal after dustless blasting to keep it from flash rusting, etc., which it did. And I kind of figured out halfway through, based on the smell and the way it feels, basically it's OSFO. And for you guys that don't know what OSFO is, it's phosphoric acid. I've got a gallon of it here somewhere, usually available at your local hardware store. It's the same stuff. It's just, I hate to say it, Eastwood, but through you guys it's double the price of what I can buy down at my hardware store. So it still leaves cleanup afterwards. So I'm going to start doing the cleanup on the engine cradle and the front subframe, just see what it takes. Usually when I dry blast, I take and just go over it quickly with a Scotch-Brite pad, just to make sure that there's all the little dust and all the little, everything is out of the grain of the metal before I actually apply paint. Let's see what it takes on the these pieces to get them cleaned up. All right, so this is kind of what it looks like. I don't consider this to be acceptable for paint application. So I've got my Scotch-Brite pad. We're gonna go to the Scotch-Brite pad on the DA sander if necessary. Let's take a look and just see how this works. This came out really clean as I was spraying it. All of the little black and everything like this is left over from the spray. So like I said, I'm just not sure about this. Let's try the sand. Let's take a look. All right. I don't like the feel of that. I wonder if I need to do another application of OSFO to get rid of this. I don't know. I'm going to give that a try, and if that doesn't work, I'm putting the sandblast temp back up, because I'm not happy with this at all. So what's the verdict? Dustless blasting versus dry blasting. Let me start off by saying I've done dustless blasting one time before. It was years ago on the hull of my sailboat, and a lot of the, well, some of the same things then kind of happened this time too. Let's start off with the worst part of it, the mess and the cleanup of the mess. Epic. You can't even imagine what a couple of 100 pounds. I mean, I used 20 bags of sand at 50 pounds per, so that's actually 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds of sand is a lot of sand. Wet sand, that's 1,000 pounds dry. Wet, it's probably more. That's a lot of sand to have to dispose of. So that's a problem. The other problem with the dustless blasting was the surface finish. I wasn't happy with the surface finish. The little black streaks you saw on the engine cradle, that's the rust treatment reacting to the surface rust and leaving, it's not a residue, it's a chemical reaction with the rust. But you're supposed to be able to paint over the top of it. I'm not comfortable with that. What I noticed too was anywhere where, when I blasted and missed a spot where there was a little paint left over, the treatment reacted really badly with that paint, and that took a lot of cleanup to clean that up. So in the end, my verdict for me, my personal preference is that the finish to me is not paint ready. It still requires cleanup afterwards, versus dry blasting, the finish is basically paint ready. It also didn't really seem to save any time. You know, it actually worked a little faster, I think, than dry blasting, just because the volume that came out of the pressure washer was quite a bit more. But at the same time, the cleanup after totally negated all of that. And oh, the mess. Oh, the mess in the parking lot and the mess on me. I had sand in my everywhere, whereas with the dry blasting, not quite that bad. So for me personally, I think I'm gonna stick with dry sandblasting, or I'm gonna farm it out to somebody that actually knows what they're doing. Well, it went from the hot mess it was yesterday. I did my old traditional sandblasting, and I am much more pleased with this than I am with what the wet blasting or the dustless blasting did. Maybe I did it wrong, I don't know, but you know what? This is what I'm going with. I'm comfortable with this, and I'm familiar with this. So this is what I'm going with. It also allowed me to see some things. There's some actually factory welding spatter. I'm just going to take a grinder, knock some of that off just to clean it up a little bit. Make it look a little prettier. 90% of this will never be seen. This is the engine cradle, but you know what? I'm going to see it. So let's knock some of that spatter off. All right, from here on out, anytime I'm going to touch it, I need to have gloves on because I don't want to leave oils from my fingers or fingerprints. Okay, quick scan for spatter on the bottom here. Alrighty, it's ready for paint. The subframe and the engine cradle are cleaned up, wiped down. I use Scotch-Brite to just kind of hit some of the edges, just to make sure that everything is clean, blown out to within an inch of their lives. There's probably still sand in there somewhere, but I've got them suspended from the lift because, well, they're heavy and it's the only thing I've got that'll hold them up, and I can spray them all at the same time. So let's put some primer on these. This would be epoxy primer. Well guys, the time has come. I'm not entirely certain if this is the very first part of reassembly. In a way it kind of is. You've watched me shoot primer on various parts of the car. You've seen me done a lot of repairs, a lot of modifications. Now it's time to actually start from ground zero and work up from there. So, got the subframe, got the engine cradle. They're going to get paint. So what we're going to do on the bottom, so for the subframe, the engine cradle, and the bottom of the car itself, the underneath side of the car, it's going to get this. It's going to get hot rod black. Now this is, it's a 2K acrylic urethane. It's a single stage, and I'll explain, for those of you guys that don't understand paints, I'll explain that in a minute. It's a single stage, and it's a satin finish. You can kind of adjust the satiny. You can go with like a flat, depending on how you put the second coat on. Usually takes 2 coats. I'm going to go with for a little bit more of an eggshell, more satiny rather than flat. So for those of you who don't know paint,
What is a single stage paint?
Well, this could get very technical and very complicated. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. A single stage paint is a urethane base, which basically urethane is like a rubber, you know, it's a plastic, it's chemistry. Anyway, it's a urethane paint, and what the single stage means is that one coat, or I should say one application, does all. Modern finishes generally tend to be what they call two-stage paints. Two-stage is a base coat, which is essentially just pigment and solvent and other chemicals. It's all chemistry. And then a clear coat goes on top of that. So on a two-stage, when you put the base coat down, there's no shiny to it. You have to put the clear coat over the top of it. The clear coat is the shine, it's the UV protectant. The base coat is the color. On a single stage paint, it's all mixed together. You've got the pigment, you've got the, I guess you'd call it the clear, all mixed together in one. What difference, why does that make a difference? Best way to describe it is, with a two-stage paint, you get a deeper finish, a deeper, glossier finish. On a single stage paint, there's paint pigment mixed in with the gloss, or in this case, there's no gloss, or little gloss. But it's all mixed in together, so there's paint at the top layer of the paint job, whereas on a two-stage paint, the paint is always on the bottom, and then there's nothing but clear in between. I don't know if that clears all that up. Another thing that might be confusing is, some guys will think single stage, two-stage, 1K, 2K, what does all that mean? For all intents and purposes, if you're talking urethanes, which almost all modern paints are, they require an activator or a hardener of some kind. And so basically it's like a chemical reaction. It's like mixing epoxy together. Nothing happens if the two of them stay apart, but when you put them together, you got glue. Same thing with the paint. The paint will not harden unless you put the activator in. So you get that chemical reaction. That's unlike the paints of old, like the old lacquers and the old acrylic enamels, which were single part, which means that the act of applying the paint, it would eventually dry without the need for an activator. On a two-part paint, you're going to need an activator or a hardener. Otherwise, the paint, well, it'll just never dry. It'll stay gooey forever. So don't confuse one-part paints, two-part paints with single-stage paints and two-stage paints. And I hope that clears up something. Let's get painting. Let me start off by saying sorry for the light in here, guys, but so where are we at on the shell? It is just about ready for paint, or I should say primer and then paint. Like I said, after my disastrous dustless or wet blasting episode, I got it back in the booth, hit the spots necessary to clean everything up on the dry blaster. The dry blaster actually showed up a few spots in my welds that blew through, so I had to fix a few spots. That's done, and it's ready.
However, it's still leaking sand, a lot of sand. So how do you get all of the sand out of this? I'm going to start off with this monstrosity. This is a backpack blower. This thing puts out, I don't know, somewhere around 3 million CFM, something like that. I'm going to get in there and just go to town. So let's just do a real quick fast forward through that for just a few seconds to see what it looks like.
Well, that got some of the sand out. I need to drip dry now because, you know, being inside that tent with very little ventilation and a bunny suit and gear and everything on, plus, you know, that backpack blower, it blows out hot air and hot exhaust. So anyway, I need to drip dry. Then I'll go back in with the actual just air hose and a blower, see if I can get any more sand out of it. I'm going to spin it on the rotisserie about 16.5 more times, try and dislodge any remaining sand. Then I can go over the areas I need to go over with a Scotch-Brite pad, final prep, and then it's ready for epoxy primer.
Okay, I spun the car around probably more than 16.5 times. Just to give you an idea, after the backpack blower and an initial hit with compressed air, this is what came out of it. That is hopefully the last of the mouse nest. And if you guys remember my rant a few weeks ago about squirrels and acorns, those came out too. The good news is, when I spin it around now, I don't hear, well, okay, I think there's one more, and it's in that rocker panel, and I have no idea how he could have gotten in there. It may come out someday, it might not, but you gotta say, at some point you gotta say enough. So I'm gonna blow it off one last time with air, and then we're gonna put primer on this. Here it is. Got primer over everything, inside, outside, and underneath. What I'm going to do next is the underside only today is going to get 2 coats of hot rod black, and I'm going to do what's called hot coating. This epoxy primer has a recoat window of according to the technical data sheet, 7 days. I don't like taking it quite that far, but what that means is that if you're within the recoat window, you can spray another coat on top of it without having to re-sand it. So all these nooks and crannies, and you know, I really don't want to have to re-sand the bottom of this car. I've got the body taped off so that I can do the undersides here. I'm not too terribly worried about the tape job. I'm not being very precise on the tape job. All that is just to keep the overspray off of the other panels. It just helps the cleanup. One of the things I did do is I went back and on some of my weld seams, I went ahead and cleaned them up a little bit, prettied them up a little bit, filled in a few spots, and I need to hit those before I go just full coverage with the black. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, so I've got what amounts to a fairly narrow area of strips that I just need to hit, well, with primer again. But the technical data sheet for the Hot Rod Black shows that it is a direct-to-metal paint, which is same as a primer. Normal finishing paints generally are not direct to metal. You have to have a primer first. In this case, I don't have to have a primer, and I do have a little bit of exposed sheet metal where I sanded through the primer I put on yesterday. If I just do my 2 straight coats, then those little areas that I addressed are gonna just look a little bit different. 1 extra coat of paint or primer would actually would solve the problem. So I need to figure out how to paint a very narrow strip. When I paint do the actual full coverage, I'm gonna go ahead and use my HVLP gun because I need the volume to get the mill thickness for the paint. But that's too much. It's too much volume for just those little narrow strips. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my detail gun. Now, I know this is old, and I mean, this gun is easily 30 years old, and it just does the job like nobody's business. So let's look at our controls real quick. So down here in the bottom, most spray guns will have similar controls in similar locations, but down here I've got air. So all this does, turn it in, it shuts the air off coming in through the gun. I'm gonna have the air out all the way. On this side, I've got 2 controls. I've got a fan control and I've got a trigger control. So now normally, I'm gonna go ahead and set this up. I'm gonna put some paint in here. I'm gonna set it up and spray a test pattern so you can see what it would look like normally. All right, so normally, when I spray this, that's what the spray comes out looking like, okay? Now, I could turn the gun sideways, but I've got a problem with volume, okay? And there's easier ways to do this. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my fan control and I'm gonna turn that down. Okay, and that's maybe a little bit too much there, but see how it just does a blob? Okay, I'm gonna adjust that a little bit. That's pretty good. Now the problem is I'm still putting out too high a volume of paint. So if I go and I spray that, it's just, I mean, it'll sit there and run in nobody's bit in a heartbeat. So what I can do is I can take the trigger control, I can turn that in, and you notice if I turn it in all the way, I can pull the trigger, but I just get air. I don't even get any paint. So what I'm gonna do is, if I take that, spin that out just a little bit, and what that'll do is, that'll limit the amount of paint that comes out by physically limiting the trigger. So that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and go with that and get set up, and we'll hit those spots on the body and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's 1 coat just on those 1 little spots. I'm gonna go with 2 coats. Reason is because I limited the paint volume
I can actually go with another coat, and that's still not going to equal the volume as if I was just spraying normally. So let me get another coat on there. Again, this is a direct to metal paint, so I can get away with it there, where normal paints I probably wouldn't be able to get away with that. And let me get the second coat on, and then at that point I'll switch over to my normal gun, and we'll get the entire body without having to worry about those little detail spots. And the finished product, well, finished to this point anyway. So you got 2 medium wet coats of Hot Rod Black all over the underside, undercarriage, what we want to call it. Okay. I also got the outside portions of the cowl and the firewall. Alright. Well, that part, well, I can't say it's done, but it's done. Well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. It's been a long, hard week. I'm pretty tired. I'm pretty sore. I might even take tomorrow off. We'll see. Starting next week, I'll get the sound deadening on the interior of the car and really start with reassembly, which is going to mean putting the subframe back together and putting it on the car. I do have one more modification due to the subframe and the connection to the car, but I can't do it until they're actually together. So work on that next week as well. Certainly appreciate everybody watching. Thanks to all you guys for tuning in every week. Please, you know, like, share, subscribe, notify. You know the drill. See you guys next week. Everybody, have a great day.